for inheritance and including. And granted, it does those things well, and you could make a pretty cool website. But what we really want is data from the backend. We want data from the database that's being rendered out inside of one of these templates. We want to see that. We kind of teased it a little bit with that request.user a few videos ago. But I want to actually go a little bit further and say, maybe I want to change the title of a page, or I want to have different content in there based off of a different user. Now we're going to work towards that, but the initial thing that we have to understand is what's called template context, and that's what we're going to cover in this one. So let's go ahead and jump into our views, and I left out this dictionary, right? So it's an empty dictionary right now, and that's actually where we can pass in context to our template. Because what Django does is it takes our template and the template context, mashes those things together, renders it, and then sends back just raw HTML to the browser. We'll see what that means in just a second, but that's essentially what's happening. It takes the template, it takes some context, mashes those things together, turns it into regular HTML, and then the user sees that. Okay, so what do I mean by context exactly? Well, context could be any data type, right? So let's go in let's say our about view, right? So let's make a dictionary, just a standard old Python dictionary, and say my underscore context equals to a dictionary, all right? So if I grab my context here and put it in and replace that empty one, we've got the same stuff going on right now. Okay, so I said that I wanted to change my title. So let's go ahead and just have some arbitrary key, meaning I'm making up this key, and we'll say my text, and we'll say this is about me, or us, whatever. Okay, so this is now my context. All of this stuff is arbitrary. I made it all up, as you probably could guess. But we've got a key value pair here. So it's just a standard dictionary with a key as a string. That's a standard thing in Python. And then I can use a string as the value, or I could use something else like number, or rather, let's say something more like my number. And we could do 1, 2, 3. Right? So I can use strings, I can use numbers, I can use other dictionaries, which I'll let you play around with the data types yourself, because that's not really what's important. What's important is how we actually bring this into context, into this about page. So since I've got this context, I have this dictionary in here, I've created a custom one for myself. I want to bring this into that template and take a look at that template. So I have two different key items here. So let's go into about.html, and let's also make sure our project is open on that page as well. So we'll go to about here, and there we go. So we're in that project that's rendering out this template. And how I actually render out any sort of item that I passed in as context, I would normally bring in my, something like a p tag, so a general HTML here, and then whatever context I want to use. So we use these curly brackets twice. So curly bracket, or braces, space, we'll put something in the middle there, and then curly bracket, and then we're done. Okay, so what is it that I need to go in the middle here? So this is called a context variable, right? So a context variable meaning what variables did we pass into our context, and what can we use? We already seen request.user, so that is something that's already built in there, right? But how do I actually access the things that I pass through? Well, hopefully you have some intuition about this. If not, it's okay, you'll develop it. We have these two variables. So our keys become the template variables that are inside of any given context that we pass. So now what I've done is I said, hey Django, we've got this about.html page, and then we have this context. I want you to mash those things together and produce something that I wouldn't expect. So in that context, back in that HTML, we can say my underscore text. And that right there should render out this key and that value, right? So it's taking this key, that's what we used, and it's going to render out this value. We can do that same thing with my number. So back into about, we can say my text underscore, or rather comma, curly brackets or braces, open and close. Sublime Text does it for us, but if you're using a different text editor, you want to make sure that it's done this way. and then we'll say my number. We save that, we go back into our about page, we refresh it. Uh-oh, we're not actually getting anything. Why is that? Well, it's actually possible that I didn't save my about view context. So I need to make sure that I'm always saving everything, right? So, if it's empty, that means it didn't pass through. It means that the context was empty. It means that this stuff wasn't actually set. It's a pretty cool error to see right off the bat. It's not really an error, it's actually a feature. But if we refresh in here, now we see that data coming through. So that, at its simplest form, is template context. And it's, again, just a really quick thing. We make a dictionary of the template context that we want to pass, and then we pass that. Now, one of the things that you might be wondering is saying, like, my list, and how do I actually work through with a list? So if I said 1, 2, 3, and some numbers or strings, it actually doesn't matter. How do I actually look at this list, right? So I come in here and I say my list. I render out that list. Well, that's nice and all, but that's not how I want to see it. I want to see it in maybe an actual HTML list item, right? Perhaps that would be a little bit better. So this gets a little bit more complex, and that gives us the discussion of